Hello again, everybody, and good afternoon, and welcome back for another interesting discussion that we're about to have. This discussion will be all around gas and hydrogen and how it can bridge the gap and help with the energy transition. So obviously, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are excited about hydrogen. So this will attempt to delve in a bit deeper and discuss the opportunities for future applications and also where we're at now. So as previously mentioned, we would definitely encourage as many questions as possible. The panelists are keen to discuss amongst themselves and then take some questions. So just before I hand over to the moderator and our esteemed panelists, I'd just like to say a very big thank you to our sponsors for helping us make the event such a great success, along with our partners and of course, all of our speakers and attendees. And finally, just draw your attention as well to an upcoming event that we have, which is a Green Hydrogen Summit. So this will be the second Green Hydrogen Summit that Solar Media has run. Our host sponsor is Smart Energy, and it will be another virtual event taking place on the 11th and 12th of May 2021. So I hope you enjoy the discussion, and any questions, just pop them in the chat. So now over to you, Michael.
Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Michael Watson. I'm a partner in the White & Case Global Energy practice based in London. Thank you for joining today's panel session on gas and hydrogen bridging the gap. This is going to be a discussion on the role of gas and hydrogen and energy storage in energy transition and in plugging any energy gaps. We really want to focus this session on thinking about how our homes, businesses, economies will be powered in the future, if we are to decarbonize. I would invite questions at any time for this session. If you have a question, please pop it into the chat box function on your screen, and I will either deal with it on the spot or put it to our panel later on during the event. And with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce our panel. Our first panelist is Peter Duffy. Peter is president of the Irish Energy Storage Association and involved in supporting power plants with flexibility, with emphasis on getting more wind-related generation onto the grid. Peter is passionate about harnessing renewable energy and with the role that energy storage can play. He previously worked at ESB for 19 years and has held roles in the energy sector all over the world. Our second panelist is Sara Kayal. Sara is Global Head of PV Integration at BP Lightsource BP in San Francisco. Thank you, Sara, for joining us so early. Sara's role is in technical integration of PV plants with storage systems using various battery technologies, and in supporting Lightsource BP's green hydrogen efforts. She has over a decade of international engineering and operational experience and has been involved in solar PV since 2008. Prior to joining Lightsource BP, Sara was with Shell as their head of global technology and engineering. Our third panelist is Barnaby Wharton. Barnaby is Director of Future Electricity Systems at Renewable UK, where he leads their work on creating a smart and flexible electricity system based on renewable generation. Prior to joining the team at Renewable UK, Barnaby was part of the energy and climate change team at CBI, where he worked on energy costs, supply side policy issues, and international climate change, representing British businesses at Paris COP. Our fourth panelist is João Galamba, Deputy Minister and Secretary of State for Energy in the Ministry of Environment and Climate Action in Portugal. He has been Secretary of State for Energy since October 2018, and he's had various roles in the National Parliament in various legislatures. Prior to being in Parliament, he worked for Banco Santander and Diamond Cluster International, and in the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union. Our final panelist is Felicia Mester. Felicia is a senior policy advisor for Hydrogen Europe, where she leads work on carbon market reform and hydrogen regulation with a view to creating an integrated and liquid hydrogen market. Previously, Felicia was with Eurogas, where she focused on gas wholesale, EU internal gas market regulation, storage, taxation, as well as low carbon and renewable gas technologies. Now, Peter, please could you kick off today's discussion with some opening remarks about what you are seeing in this fast developing area?
Yes, Michael, thank you very much for your introduction, and good afternoon to all of your audience as well. My opening remarks will be with respect to the electricity system, because the electricity system will continue to be central in the future. So in other words, like the grid will continue to grow. So through the electrification of transport and heat and so on. So moving on then to storage then. I would say like that short and medium duration energy storage has largely been cracked. And so the challenge is around long duration energy storage, where hydrogen gas storage will be actually a key element. And I'll define just a few of those things. So short duration storage would be from zero, that's actually an event taking place, tripping of a major generator, a major transmission line, out to 20 minutes. So it's largely around system stability and security. As the penetration level of non-synchronous generation, that's mainly wind and solar, as they increase above 50%. So today, for example, or going back over the last in recent years, we've had big heavy steam turbines, generators, and they're able to ride through the bumps whenever actually an event occurs on the system. But in the future, when we go with a lot of non-synchronous generation, and I'm talking about largely wind and solar, and when that happens, it's the system needs support, and the grid operator needs a lot of additional system services. Some of those in the shorter term will be supplied, of course, actually by rapid response lithium-ion batteries and flywheels, and they'll provide fast frequency response and other system services. And so the problem actually, that part actually is largely under control. Places like Ireland are already seeing that, because their level of is up to about 66% or 70%, but other systems will begin to see that in the future. Moving on then to medium duration, that's roughly from about 20 minutes out to, let's say, 48 hours. And this is now the focus of much of energy storage developments worldwide, but dominated by lithium-ion batteries and flow batteries too. And of course, augmented by other types of storage, which would be pump storage and liquid air, compressed air, and so on. So we see an ever increasing battery storage facilities and being developed around the world, and largely in Europe and USA and Australia. And as I say, like in many cases, actually, they're delivering storage up to about 4 hours. And indeed, in some cases, they are now competing with peaking plants. So this brings us actually then on to the big challenge, of course, facing economies as they seek to decarbonize is the large-scale, long-duration security of energy. So from 48 hours out to maybe 2-3 weeks and perhaps more. And that's where the real challenge is into the future. The greatest risk of serious disruption is likely to arise in periods of low wind and solar, and that can last for 2 or 3 weeks. And indeed, this has happened actually from time to time, not just actually in Britain and in Ireland, but indeed actually across Europe, and indeed actually around the world, this can happen. So batteries, flywheels, pumped hydro, compressed air, thermal, they're all unlikely to be of mega capacity to give us that security into the future, that long duration security. And that's why we must start looking at other vectors, energy vectors. And without doubt, hydrogen and other green gases will be very much part of that picture. And I'll come to that actually in a few minutes. So storage of hydrogen, it can be achieved through a range of measures, including possibly depleted gas reservoirs, aquifers, salt caverns, disused mines, hydrogen storage terminals, and to a lesser extent in the national grid itself. But of course, like some countries are blessed with wonderful geology and other countries are not. So storing hydrogen is a big issue that will be addressed in the future. One significant advantage, of course, of green hydrogen is that we expect to see that there will be large-scale floating wind turbines, and they will actually produce huge quantities of green electricity. And that green electricity can be fed into, of course, big electrolyzers, and then we have our hydrogen. And that's mainly where we're going to see a lot of it in the future. Now, you may have brown hydrogen and grey, which is from coal or gas, and with and without carbon capture. So just moving on then. So over the next 10 years, we'll see hydrogen being increasingly used for powering heavy duty transport like buses, trucks, and so on. But of course, cars will continue and are more likely to go with batteries. So hydrogen is an obvious, we also say hydrogen is an obvious choice actually for powering shipping worldwide, but not directly for the airline industry. The airline industry, I think it's much more likely that we'll see synthetic fuels coming from hydrogen. And that's where we'll see the development there. The storage of hydrogen then will be a big challenge. As I come to the end of my opening remarks, the storage of hydrogen will be a big challenge and will attract huge attention and R&D over the coming decade. Some of it may be stored in another form. And one of them here, of course, actually is to mention is green ammonia. And ammonia, is why we don't traditionally associate it with combustion or power generation or so on. We're going to see ammonia very much coming into the picture in the future. So my last slide then, or my last point then, is that while is short and medium term storage, it's well in hand. The long duration energy storage is where the real challenge lies. And it's our belief and my belief that hydrogen and other green gases will be very much part of that picture into the future. Michael.
Thank you, Peter. Now, Sara, I'd like to turn to you to hear about the work you're doing with Lightsource BP in green hydrogen.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Michael. And it was a good transition from Peter because you just mentioned green. So maybe I can give a little bit of background on Lightsource BP. So we are a solar developer. We've been founded about more than 10 years ago. We've been acting in 14 countries and with 16 gigawatt in the pipeline. What we, as you mentioned, our relevance to the hydrogen is green hydrogen because we provide the renewable side of it. And I wanted to start the conversation with two pilot projects that we are working on with green hydrogen. One is with the South Wales Industrial Cluster as part of their 2040 decarbonization plan. We are providing the phase 1 pilot project, which is about 20 megawatt of solar and wind, which would be the renewable side of the green hydrogen at the site. And the hydrogen part of it is done, is the scope of work of other contractors that we're working with. And then that would be turned into converted to green ammonia or can be transported out. So this would be then for a lot larger project that come up. This would be just kind of to make sure that we have a pilot project so we can de-risk some of the technical parts of it. The second project wanted to talk about is the 1.5 gigawatt in South Wales, New South Wales, Australia. That's also a pilot project, so you can tell from just the size of the pilot project how large the actual project can be. But this is very similar as well. The either on-site or grid-connected solar and PV, solar and wind generation would be providing the renewable side of the hydrogen. And as we have a 50% joint venture with BP, the hydrogen side and the logistic part of it is done by BP. Just to wrap up kind of both of these projects and some of the gaps that we already see in the technology, and as Peter mentioned, all the R&D work that is happening, what we see green hydrogen moving forward, what are the advantages? And we think that's what it's gonna be taking off based on the large amount of power that is needed for green hydrogen. Some of the what I would say the advantages of green hydrogen is all the administrations and most of the companies, as you can hear, all the corporates, they have a decarbonization net zero plan. So there are a lot of policy changes that would really help us moving this forward. The second one is renewable power cost has gone down quite a lot, and it makes it more feasible to be used in this type of applications. Electrolyzer cost has gone down quite a lot as well. And just to wrap it up, we would see to be able to, one, store the energy, which would be, so we are using renewable to store it, and we can have it when we want, and then transport it, which means we can have renewable energy where we want and where it's mostly needed. That would really, I would say, wrap up the advantages of green hydrogen and what we are working on. And thank you all. Back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Sara. Now over to Barnaby for your perspective.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I think a lot of what I was going to across has probably been covered off by Peter and Sara already, but it's such an exciting area. We know that we need to move to a renewables-dominated energy system. We've got huge challenges with climate change, decarbonisation. And so the question is, how do we get to that net zero world in a way that is of least cost to consumers and of most benefit to the economy? And green hydrogen is going to be a hugely important part of that. As Sara was just saying, wind and solar are now the cheapest forms of generation that we have. So it makes sense to be generating as much power as we can from those sources, but that's not without its challenges. Obviously, there are times when it's very windy. We may be over-generating power, particularly as we build out more and more offshore and onshore wind, and as Peter was saying, we're getting more floating onto the system as well. And similarly, in the summer, we've got periods of bright sunshine and perhaps not so much demand unless you're really going on the air conditioning. So the question is, how do we manage that variability of generation alongside demand, particularly as Peter was saying, as we look at across the seasons, with high periods of wind generation, as we've seen recently in wind. We broke a record just a few days ago, and over the summer as well with solar. And green hydrogen is going to play a hugely important part of that. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. Firstly, we can store it, and that's the really important part of it, is that you can break the sort of the instantaneous need to link generation and demand. So we can be pumping hydrogen produced from renewable electricity into a whole range of different storage facilities, whether that is geological storage, depleted oil wells, aquifers, that sort of thing, salt caverns, or we can look at the sort of the line pack in piping, or just bottle it up for transport and things. And that's actually going to be a relatively relatively low cost thing to do. And as I was saying, we're seeing costs of renewables come down, but also we're going to see costs of green hydrogen come down as well. At Renewable UK, we hope to see a cost of £2 a kilo by the end of this decade. I think that's totally feasible if we sort of get on it and support this industry now. And the other thing that hydrogen is going to do is play the other side of the variability and can be a source of low carbon power generation as well, replacing CCGT and gas and that sort of thing in the longer term. There are some questions over sort of life cycle efficiency, but if you're getting lots and lots of cheap renewables, it makes sense to be maybe doing some probably a not so efficient system with using hydrogen for power generation, but it enables that whole system decarbonisation and the lowest costs overall. So in Renewable UK, we're working alongside lots of our wind generation members, floating wind, offshore, fixed bottom, onshore, and speaking to colleagues across the renewable sector and solar as well, looking at how we can enable these electrolysis plants to come forward, what they need to do to expand and scale up in terms of the productions, and also in terms of the sorts of facilities we're looking at. It's a hugely exciting time. We've got the hydrogen strategy coming out later this year. We're looking at business model support, these sorts of projects. But storage of hydrogen across the seasons is going to be absolutely critical if we're going to achieve that net zero goal. And I will leave it there.
Thank you very much, Barnaby. And now over to you, Mr. Secretary of State, for your perspective from Portugal.
Sorry, I think the Secretary of State is having some audio issues, so we can come back to him once we've managed to get him. Oh, I think he's back. Hi, João, can you hear us?
Yeah, fine now.
Great.
Hi.
Thank you. And for your perspective from Portugal?
Hello?
Hi, are you able to hear us? Shall we we'll come back to you. I think we're going to move on to Felicia.
No. I'm fine.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. And for your perspective from Portugal, please.
So the transition to new energy consumption model is a natural ecosystem for the development of new business models, more sustainable, more resilient, and fully aligned with our long-term objectives, namely regarding the impact towards carbon neutrality. Portugal presents strong arguments to remain at the forefront of the energy transition and to build a strategy towards a carbon neutral economy. In the next decade, the energy sector will be the one that will make the greatest contribution to our decarbonization. So the energy transition plays an especially relevant role in the context of a transition to a decarbonized society. With the objective of making hydrogen one of the solutions for decarbonizing our economy. And at the same time, we intend to promote a new industrial sector with potential for exporting and generating wealth. Portugal is promoting an industrial policy around hydrogen, which is based on the definition of a set of public policies that guide, coordinate, and mobilize public and private investment in projects in the areas of production, storage, transport, consumption, and usage of renewable gases in Portugal. The Portuguese government already has a set of actions underway. We've already have the legal framework for the production, transport, distribution, and usage of renewable gases, including the injection of renewable gases into our natural gas network. And we have already, in the Portuguese legal framework, we've extended the guarantees of origin from the power sector to renewable gases. And we've also ensured, both in our regular European funds and our resilience and recovery program, a robust financial framework that will ensure that Portugal has the means to finance our strategy. Additionally, we are currently working on our first hydrogen auction. We intend to do, apart from the CAPEX support mechanisms that we will have, we want to support usage of hydrogen, be it in industry, transport through the grid or through other means of transport and distribution. And we will do this year, we expect to do this year, our first carbon CFD to support end users in their consumption of hydrogen or hydrogen-related products. This way, with the legal framework, with the guarantees of origin, with a robust financial architecture to support this project, plus these auctions to support consumers and users in their consumption of hydrogen, we believe that we have in place the right framework to kickstart our strategy. Currently, we did a call for a manifestation of interest for projects for hydrogen. We had 74, we 37, and we are currently organizing them geographically. We will have at least 2 regional hydrogen valleys in Portugal, in the center north of Portugal, and in the south in the port of Sines. We believe that the cluster approach, the hydrogen valley idea, is an excellent way to, through synergies and through collective efficiencies and through regionally located projects, we can, due to their complementarity, have in the short term at least 2 areas in Portugal with a nice ecosystem where we can try the hydrogen value chain. Apart from that, I would like to mention also the storage options. As was mentioned, hydrogen can play a significant role in long-term storage, and we are also thinking of it. And in Portugal, we have a lot of salt caverns that are currently used to store natural gas, and that we plan to move them gradually to the storage of hydrogen. We have a long expertise in salt caverns, so this is an important asset from our side, apart from the assets that we already have in the renewable energy world. We have a lot of sun, we have a lot of wind, and we in the north of Portugal, we have a big importance of hydropower. Our main storage system in Portugal is pumped hydro. We have more than 3 gigawatts of pumped hydro storage in a total system capacity of 20-something gigawatts. So it's quite significant. Just for you to have an idea, the goals for Spain in 2030 in terms of storage have almost already, in relative terms, been met by Portugal in 2020 just with pumped hydro. Of course, we will have ion lithium batteries, but we believe that hydrogen can also play a complementary role in this. And this is basically it. We will also count on hydrogen, of course, as an enabler to achieve the objectives of the European Green Deal, tied with our recovery program. And we believe that Portugal has a very relevant role to play in the hydrogen economy of the future, that we want it to happen as soon as possible. And that's what we're working on at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary of State. So now over to Felicia for your perspective.
Thank you, Michael. Well, being the last speaker is never easy, especially with the great insight that we have had until here. But I'll try to fill the gaps a tiny bit, as much as I can. So I'd like to say that, again, I represent Hydrogen Europe, which is the European association standing for more than 200 members from across the entire value chain of the European hydrogen and fuel cell ecosystem. As previous panelists have already mentioned, the biggest challenge facing economies in their drive to decarbonize is long-term seasonal storage. We also find this to be one of the main issues. If I may, I'd like to react to some of the points that I've heard, kind of to do to have a smooth transition towards the debate. Firstly, I think Peter mentioned that there are some challenges to hydrogen storage. Indeed, there are varying geological formations across countries. However, even today, we have different formations and different infrastructure needs in all. Well, I'll talk about Europe in member states, and we don't have gas storage and high flexibility across all members in Europe. And I think with hydrogen, we will have a roughly similar approach to flexibility. It indeed can be stored in various formations, and as Mr. Galamba mentioned, well, salt caverns are one of the most prevalent way of storing hydrogen. And here I'd like just to put it in perspective that in Germany alone, the salt cavern capacity is of about 9,400 terawatt-hour of hydrogen, both onshore and offshore. On top of that, if we add existing gas assets, including the gas storage and gas grid that can and will be increasingly hydrogen, repurposed to be hydrogen ready, those already represent around 230 terawatt-hour in caverns and around 130 terawatt-hour, in the grid. So even if we take into consideration the lower energy density of hydrogen and would take about a third out of the natural gas energy density, I think that still gives us quite a large volume of storage that we'd be talking about. Secondly, I think we've also kind of touched upon the hydrogen inefficiencies to a certain extent, and I think when looking at that, well, any system has certain inefficiencies, but I would turn it the other way around. I would say that the risk to fail storing this valuable renewable energy and failing to use this energy to decarbonize quicker as a consequence is a much greater challenge and problem than any inefficiencies we might have in the system. As such, I think that when we look at hydrogen storage, we look beyond the need for flexibility for the electricity grid, and we look first and foremost, as it was mentioned before, at covering load imbalances in the network and ensuring security of energy supply. The imbalances are daily. There's low demand at night. They're weekly. There's low demand on weekends usually. And seasonal, there's lower demand in summer, even if we account for the air conditioning need and so on. Of course, here again, I will say that I'm talking about averages in Europe. Currently, those are mentioned by conventional power plants, and I think Peter has mentioned that before. And as we move towards an increasingly renewable energy system, we will lose this balancing capacity, but we will also create some challenges that are linked to the non-dispatchability of renewables. A good example in this sense, I think, is the fact that solar produces a lot more in summer, and wind usually produces more during night, which is precisely when there is less energy demand as well. And if we add on top of that electrification of certain industries and transportation and heating, this would further increase the seasonal imbalance and demand for electricity. The other thing that I think is also important to understand, because we keep speaking about the grid of the future, but I think it's important to understand that energy balancing issues are already an issue. And for the sake of staying uniform, I'll stay with the same country. So I'll talk about Germany. And here in 2018 alone, over 5 terawatt-hour of renewables were curtailed. And this taken into consideration that renewables are only 1% of the total electricity supply of Germany. As renewables will grow in the energy mix, so will the amount of curtailed energy. And in a system of renewables, with 100% renewables, the curtailment increases in Germany alone will amount to about 110 terawatt-hour. Just to put this in perspective, this is enough to fuel 10 million fuel cell vehicles. Certainly, there are other large-scale sources of flexibility, and I'd like to put this in perspective as well. The entire pumped hydro storage capacity in Germany is around 0.04 terawatt-hour, which would be enough to support grid balancing, but wouldn't be enough altogether for power generation. Then I think Peter also talked about batteries. if we look at the biggest Tesla battery storage in Australia, and I think the capacity of that, if I'm not mistaken, is about 129 megawatt hour or something like that. Well, our intelligence team did the calculations, and we would need 10,000 of those facilities at a cost of 1.5 trillion euros to get a storage capacity for Germany of less than a single day of electricity. I'm not going to go further. There are further examples that I'm happy to give, and if you're interested in that, maybe we can touch upon this bilaterally. But I think what I do want to kind of say with my speech is that I'm not trying to say that we will need only hydrogen storage, not at all. I think we will need all storage solutions. They have a place in our future energy grid, for short-term balancing, for mid-term storage. However, we definitely need to be mindful of the importance to develop a sustainable large-scale seasonal storage for industry, for heating, and why not for heavy-duty vehicles, for maritime, and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Felicia, and that was very interesting. And I think, listening to our panel, I feel quite upbeat about all of this, and everything sounds very positive and the future looks bright. So what I'd like to do now is just maybe touch on some of sort of the challenges to all of this, and what sort of more needs to be done, picking up on all the themes that were mentioned. And I wonder if, Barnaby, I could maybe hand to you first to say, what more needs to be done by government, for example. Does industry need support? Does industry need mechanisms in place specifically for green hydrogen, as we've seen perhaps elsewhere with renewables?
Short answer is yes. I think we do. As I said, I would see by the end of this decade, green hydrogen production being around £2 a kilo, which is competitive with all other forms of gas. But in order to get there, we need to learn a lot about how to do it, and we need to scale up our production facilities of electrolyzers, and we need to understand exactly how these sort of projects are going to work. And yes, I think you essentially need seed funding for the industry to deliver that. It needs to be done, I think, in a way that is competitive, that drives down costs. There are lots of lessons we can learn from the offshore wind industry and the CFD and how that worked. But there are also differences. These are actually slightly more complicated projects. The offtake and demand is totally different. So I think one of the challenges then will be about supporting green hydrogen down the cost curve and to competitiveness. Is how do you create a scheme or a support mechanism that can address all the different types of projects that you have out there? Whether it is a large offshore wind farm generating lots and lots of dedicated generating lots and lots of I think I've frozen, but it's complicated, and there are lots of different ideas out there.
Thank you. And I think Mr. Galamba, over to you. I mean, the flip side of that question, now that we've asked Barnaby what more sort of government can do, what more do you think corporates could be doing to support green hydrogen in particular, and the efforts you spoke about in Portugal?
Well, we really see this as an interrelated ecosystem. So for us, it's sometimes difficult to really separate the role of governments from the role of companies, the importance of production versus the relevance of demand. We really see this as an integrated whole. We are working closely with companies in Portugal. So we see the challenge. I think the challenge here is coordination between public and private entities, coordination between private entities, and we have to work closely together. So I would say that's the main challenge. The biggest challenge, I think, we are trying to tackle it now, it's the simultaneous requirements of supply and demand. You cannot think of supply without thinking of demand, and vice versa. And that's not the way usually economists think of the way an economy works. They see as isolated agents, and they think of problems of isolated agents. We cannot do this here. So we need to think in system-wise and interrelated terms. And that is why, for example, we've launched a call for grants of 40 million euros this year. It will be the first call that we will make. We will make several along the years, but we've already started. It's open till the end of April. And we want to tie that with the auctions to consumers that will support consumers. And we want to give time for some coordination between production and consumption. So we see the CapEx support as an enabling condition for production to exist, but at the same time, we should tackle the issue of usage and consumption. So that's why we want to tie the two together. So we will support with CapEx projects that want to produce, distribute, and then we will try through a carbon CFD to neutralize the costs in an efficient way between the fossil alternatives they are currently using and the green alternatives, namely green hydrogen, that we want to promote. So we are tying the two together. We see CapEx support for producers and OpEx support for consumers as part of the same challenge. So that's why we want to do it together at the same time. And I think if we do this, then we can kickstart an hydrogen economy. Another challenge is to do this across borders. And why? Because the mechanism that I just explained is for domestic consumption. Portugal will not support, although we want to export hydrogen or hydrogen-related products. Of course, it is not up to Portugal to support, I don't know, the Dutch consumers or German consumers that want to buy hydrogen from producing countries. And if countries don't coordinate to try to put in place cross-border mechanisms, so the entire incentive structure is flawed, because what we will end up having is small projects in each country just catering to their domestic consumers and only. So if scaling up is the challenge, and it's a crucial feature to decrease costs, and of course for larger scale projects you will need cross-border flows, then we will need to think of cross-border support mechanisms. And the European Union is the right geographical space to do it, because we have the common infrastructures that look at the European market as a European market, not as a sum of small nation states markets. And I think that is the next challenge. Portugal can support its producers, it can support its consumers, but what about producers in Portugal that want to sell to consumers in other countries? For that, we don't have a support mechanism yet. And if we don't find it, then all projects in Europe will be of a smaller than desired scale. And it will be difficult to establish export and import links. We are also currently working on that, but that is a challenge that we've not yet completely addressed, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Felicia, I wonder if you could maybe pick up on that topic about, that challenge that was just, that Mr. Galamba just raised about how we bring Europe together. You spoke about storage opportunities in Germany, elsewhere. How do we incentivize everyone to come together so that we can, maximize the opportunities that are out there?
Well, I think first of all, yeah, I'm not muted. Great. I think first of all, it's important to look at the legislation that we currently have in Europe. And unfortunately, today, hydrogen is covered in a very dispersed manner around electricity, fuels, gas, emissions of industry, and so on. So we are kind of, what I think is most important is having a stable regulatory framework that would enable investor confidence, that would offer support for projects, that would offer support of OPEX. This is what we hear quite a lot from our members as well, that there is some support of CAPEX, but no support of OPEX. So I was extremely happy to hear from Mr. Galamba that they are looking at both demand and supply measures as a whole and not in isolation of each other. We think it's very important to have a guarantee of origin system that covers both renewable and low carbon hydrogen in order to ensure that we start already greening the gas grid. It is very important that we don't miss out on these assets, but we make good use of them. It is important to establish the principle of CO2 as the new currency of the energy system, and using the energy taxation and the emissions trading scheme revision that is ongoing this year in this sense, and starting to promote and take out the subsidies and exemptions of those fuels that are extremely polluting. It is important to promote and support hydrogen market stimulation programs, including quotas on targets, dedicated programs and support schemes, enable on competition a competitive hydrogen economy by clarifying the market design and supporting sectoral integration. And that is also going to be ongoing, I think, with the revision of the 10E, with the revision of the deployment of alternative fuels infrastructure, with the revision of the gas directive and so on. It is very important to remove undue barriers to hydrogen production and infrastructure through these legislative proposals in Europe, and unlock the innovative financial instruments that we have through the Recovery and Resilience Fund and other investment channels to ensure that we continue leading competitively in Europe, that we continue being an example to all the other states for lowering emissions. Yeah, a supportive framework is what is needed, Michael.
Thank you, Felicia. And then Sara, just touching on another theme that came out of what Mr. Galamba spoke about, and that's just on integration. And, you know, so what are these, you know, once again, it all sounds good and it all sounds like a bright future, but what are the current gaps to achieve technical integration when it comes to green hydrogen?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So we know both of these industries have been around for a while, and there have been a lot of R&D going on both sides of it, on renewable, also on hydrogen. Renewable side, I think we are getting into the way now in solar that has become a commodity. It's a lot more straightforward to design. We have standards and we know how to tackle the renewable projects. Now to combining these two, that's where most of the gaps are coming from. So the integration side of it, the technical integration, and that's where I believe a lot of support that has been done, a lot of work that has been done on the battery storage side has already supported the green hydrogen. But most of it, it's regarding controls, hardware, power electronics that is needed for building that, really taking advantage and optimizing the electrolyzer input. That's where most of the cost of the green hydrogen goes to, and that's where we are mostly really emphasizing on. So and for that, we are looking at pilot projects to de-risk that technology. A lot of those technologies already exist, but it's really to push the technology, push the industry that what is needed for this specific application and move forward. That's what we did on battery storage. DC coupled system didn't exist, but we worked with power electronics and other manufacturers, and we modeled it based on that's what needed. And now the technology is more mature in that sector. So I would say the main steps that I would say to take to get there is having specs, standards, technical specs with de-risking this technology and educating the industry what is exactly needed on the integration, technical integration side of it.
Great, thank you. And Peter, you opened up, so I'll ask you to sort of close on the final bit. Another theme that came out is how do we incentivize, sectors where hydrogen can be the solution? How do we incentivize them to sort of buy in to green hydrogen as a solution?
Okay, Michael, thank you. Michael, just before I come to that, can I just actually throw in a few comments? And that is, I think actually unlike the wind or solar, the bringing hydrogen or green hydrogen is a far bigger task. The reason I say that is that, for example, the electricity sector has been there. You had a grid, you had generators, you had customers, you had suppliers, all of that. The whole infrastructure was there. And along comes somebody and it says, I'll put up a wind turbine, just plugs it in and away you go. Then the next thing you have a wind farm and you have bigger wind farms. And as issues arose about balancing supply, somebody came up with the idea and said, why don't we come up with large scale batteries and we'll actually have storage? So in other words, the infrastructure was entirely in place. And if you take then, and going back actually what the Deputy Minister said there a few minutes ago there, is that if you look at hydrogen, it's quite the opposite. You start actually producing, put on 100 megawatt of electrolyzer in the morning. What do you do actually with the hydrogen? Or you get actually customers, large scale customers actually who have a considerable usage for hydrogen. Where are they going to get it? So what I'm saying is there is that there is no infrastructure in place. So from production to distribution to demand, and in the center then actually this whole storage thing. So this is a far greater task, and that's the point I would make. And I would say, like, I mean, coming back to Felicia, like, I mean, is that it certainly needs to be tackled very much actually on a collective or central basis. I don't think that there's room for countries to go it alone. I think actually the task is far greater than that. I think by going at it actually in a much more collective way, we can have some sort of a high level framework and then almost a sharing of information. So much of the wonderful work that's coming out of Portugal, as you can see, some of that actually can be shared, and other countries are doing other aspects. So that maybe it may be production, or it may be distribution, or actually getting the demand, getting the customers up and running. So anyway, in short, I'm saying about is, I think that coming back to what Felicia was saying there, is that there is a need for some sort of a very central pulling it together, because this is a huge undertaking. And remember, in my experience, 10 years goes very quickly. And therefore, in fact, actually, if we were to make progress by 2030, the sooner we get moving on that, the better. Michael, I'm sorry, I probably have lost the initial question.
No,
you asked me.
no, that's perfect.
Sorry.
No, Peter, that's perfect. And I think a fantastic way to sort of round out the discussion. I think we have some upbeat optimism, but some honesty about the challenges. So I want to thank our fantastic panel today. Thank you for everyone for joining this session. And no doubt this is just the start of the discussion. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much, Michael, for facilitating the discussion. We have run over a little bit. I'm sure we could go on. We have much more to talk about, but as Michael said, great way to kind of begin the discussion, frame the discussion. And as I mentioned, if you are interested in our Green Hydrogen Summit, then we'll be talking about all of the opportunities and applications at that event in May. So now I just want to say thank you again to our panelists, and thank you to the audience for listening. And we'll be back again in 8 minutes for the Trina storage workshop. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Barnaby.
Thank you.
And everyone. And thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye now.